Train harder than last time, I'll rest when I'm dead. So if you're an athlete, then obviously you've got to train, and this is the way to improve. So it makes sense that the harder and more often you can train, the most effect you're going to get to your performance. But obviously being an athlete or even just training in the gym is not as simple as just brute strength. There's obviously quality, technique, form, and obviously if you're an athlete, you're translating, say, the strength in the gym towards a complex skill. And yes, being stronger is going to help that complex skill, but does that complex skill get impeded by training hard? You know, the quantity over quality or quality over quantity, you know, type of an approach. So obviously the key to training as an athlete is to train hard as you can train with quality that you can recover from. So it's not just about harder brute force, because it may well have an impeding role within the other components of that person's training, and it may even impede that training as well. So if someone's doing a compound lift in the gym and they are really fatigued by that, then the next time they train, they may well actually not perform that movement as well, which might mean they don't train as well, or they may risk injury or whatever else. So the research study here, where they trained them really hard and they were looking at the effect on their motor skills and to see if that impeded their motor skills and how long it impeded them for, based on training really hard. So what did they do? So they had 30 untrained male university students. Now, again, it's always the laughing stock that they're always choosing male university students and they're untrained. So we have to take this with a pinch of salt. Obviously, we know that newbies training in the gym, training hard, get more muscle soreness, are getting more neurological fatigue, more problems. Therefore, we might not be able to extrapolate that completely, this exact information, to a trained individual who is used to training like an athlete, therefore. But it'll still give us some ideas about what the body's doing, how long it's taking to recover, and we could potentially convert this, obviously not as severely, over to the athlete as well. So they split these people into exercise group versus non-exercise control group. So the exercise group did 10 sets of front dumbbell raises, which obviously is quite a lot. They started their load at a 10 repetition max, did a 1 second concentric and a 3 second eccentric. And the whole point of the eccentric being so long and slow was to really emphasize the delayed onset muscle soreness effect. And we know this is greater from more eccentric type loading. Obviously, the non-exercise control group didn't do anything in terms of exercise. The motor skill test was actually throwing darts. So the exercise group did their training, right? Then both groups, obviously the other group didn't do their training. Both groups then did 4 consecutive days of learning to throw darts, practicing, I think, 150 trials a day for 4 consecutive days to obviously motor learn, to learn skill acquisition, so that they could then improve, which would naturally occur as you would expect. The more you practice, the better you would get. They examined other areas as well, not just the motor skill. They were looking at delayed onset muscle soreness, and they were looking at the muscle recovery in terms of a isometric maximum contraction, and to see when that had recovered back to baseline. So the exercise group's DOMs recovered by 4 days after the exercise bout, but the maximum isometric contraction strength didn't recover until 7 days after the exercise bout. Now, initially, both groups improved with their accuracy of dart throwing. So obviously they did their training, their 4 days of learning the skill. And on that day, on the 4th day, they found that both had improved their motor skill, but not by a lot. After that, though, what was interesting and expected is that the exercise group, they worsened. They actually didn't improve, they worsened, and the other group really improved. And this was around the 7-day zone after the exercise. So this is therefore 3 days outside of the skill learning part. Now, obviously the effect of the fatigue, perhaps still within the system or something, was impeding them as a sort of delayed effect. So they exercised, they learned the skill, they were no worse than the other group really at the point of starting the actual testing, but then by the time 3 days of that testing had ended, they declined massively in their motor skill. And like I say, this was 7 days after the exercise bout. Now, it's possible that it could have even lasted longer than this. And as I said at the beginning though, we've got to be careful. These are newbies, they're not used to training, their soreness will be higher, their fatigue will be higher. So therefore, we've got to be cautious on saying, this means that you can't train very often and be doing a skillful activity. However, it does show you that the DOMs had gone. So they weren't sore anymore, but they still declined in their performance. And their strength obviously was still down a little bit at that point as well. But nearly back to normal. So it means you can be not sore after training, back to pretty much full strength, but your motor skill could be still declined. And this is important for an athlete training for quality and improving skill, and even someone training in the gym doing compound complex lifting. So it's something that you should be aware of, is what this kind of concludes, that just because you feel okay and just because your strength is back doesn't mean your complex skill movement patterning is back to normal. And this could increase the chance of injury, but even still, it just improves, or declines, should I say, the performance of your skill kind of work. So make sure that you're careful in the way that you train. Now, these did train hard as well and they were newbies, but it still applies. That same principle applies. Obviously some applicability elements of issue in there as well, but still interesting nonetheless. But anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.